So the South African National Defence Forces Lieutenant General Ntshavheni Maphaha has criticised or has strongly criticised the government and politicians for failing to secure South Africa's borders, describing them as porous and unprotected. He also accused government of reducing the country's defence force to, quote, a Mickey Mouse defence force. His remarks come after the deaths of 14 South African soldiers in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
What I'm going to say here, I may be trampling on some cones, so please pardon me, Premier, and the parliamentarians that are here. All of you know that South Africa, in its position in the world, we are a global player. In Africa, we are the leader in terms of economics and geopolitics. And therefore, we are considered a big brother. No, you cannot be a big brother if you are unable to wield a stick that will make people be afraid. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is he talking about and all that? How many of you will build a beautiful and expensive house and not fence it and protect it? I don't think none of you will do that. Constitutionally, the South African National Defence Force is mandated to protect and defend the country. Now, any home will display its character, its worthiness, by the level of security that it places around it. Now, if we're going to play big brother in Africa, and therefore what we give for the Defence Force should symbolize that. A lot has been said about the South African National Defence Force not being well equipped, not being resourced and all that. I'm not going to get into that, but I'm saying, and I'm appealing to the politicians that are here, that next time you sit down and debate, think whether you are protected or not. Because that grant that you're giving to the people out there, the education of your children and everything else will not materialize if you're not protected. I'm sure many of you know that we are sharing our grants for the poor with people who are not supposed to share the grants. And that is because we are not protected. Our borders are porous. And they're porous because you, the politicians, have decided you want a Mickey Mouse Defence Force. I'm sorry to say that. And by the way, the Adjutant General is here. I'm protected. I'm not making a political speech, by the way.
Well, joining me for a conversation on this is the Chairperson of the Defence and Military Veterans Parliamentary Committee, Dakota Legoete. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. Do you agree with the sentiments being expressed there by the Surgeon General that our Commander-in-Chief, President Cyril Ramaphosa, is essentially presiding over a Mickey Mouse defence force that has been created by politicians?
Thank you very much, Aldrin, and good morning to all the viewers at home. I think I have to start by saying that it's just unfortunate that the General could not sense the occasion which he was addressing. It was a funeral where we were mourning the fallen heroes of our National Defence Force and the pride of our nation who passed on in the DRC in defense of peace in the region, in the country, international. Now, it's just unfortunate because a general is a person of privilege who sits in the military command council, which is responsible for the security of the country on a daily basis and paid by the taxpayers. Now, it's just unfortunate that a general would say some of these things in an occasion which is not supposed to say, because it was only last week where we had the Minister and the Chief of the National Defence Force appearing before the Joint Standing Committee of Defence. We did ask the Chief of the National Defence Force, General Maphaha, that is the country safe? It's our borders safe? the general, the chief of the Defence Force guaranteed us as a portfolio committee only now to realize that one of his subordinates, who's the Lieutenant General, is saying something different. We can't have the army top brass speaking in folk tongues in a country where people are depressed, there's high unemployment, people are anxious, hysteric, and somebody who's supposed to defend us and protect us is saying something different. This general, some of our generals must now start to account because they need to appreciate the fact that the army now, since the death of 14 of our soldiers in DRC, the army and the National Defence Force going to be on spotlight. We have to improve our military-civilian relations, and some of our generals need to help us to communicate positive stories on the defense of the country, on the safety of the country, on the safety of our borders, because a general is not a person who can cry. We can't have a crying general who has the responsibility to defend the sovereignty as well as the territorial integrity of the country. Complaining, we can't have such generals.
Yeah.
I think we can do better in terms of what we are doing.
Yeah, but then considering that you heard what General Maphaha, who is the chief of the South African National Defence Force, was telling Parliament, and what the the Surgeon General was telling mourners at that funeral, who do you believe in that particular case? Because surely there's something wrong and there's something amiss. And he even he had a precursor to the statement that he was going to make, and saying that you have politicians that are in or that are among the mourners at the time, and also that he has the defense of one of the senior military veterans who was also in the room at the time. So meaning that he's speaking from a position of, I know what I'm saying, I have experienced this, and this is the current reality of South Africa's National Defence Force, and not what was shared with parliamentarians by General Maphaha.
Look, we have limitations as parliamentarians. Ours is to play oversight on the executive as well as on the administration. So a general sits in the military command council to plan and to execute the defense of the country on a daily basis. So by inference, if a general speaks like this, he's either naive or incompetent or does not know his work, because his work is fully outlined in Section 200 of the Constitution, subsection 2, which gives us in the National Defence Force the responsibility of defending the territorial integrity, the sovereignty, the republic, its people, the Constitution, and all international laws. Now, even for a general to cast aspersion on our mission in the DRC, which is part of international law, it's very amateurish and least irresponsible and reckless. Because a general speaking like this creates a trust deficit between the system or the establishment and the public. So for a general to say like this, it means the country is in trouble. He needs to explain more. We need to get his competency level. We need to understand how he qualified to be a general if he does not know his responsibility.
Yeah, okay. So you're saying with the general speaking like this, it means that the country is in trouble. What are you going to do about it as the Committee for Defence and Military Veterans?
Look, obviously, this is the matter of the executive. We will play oversight over it. The minister and the chief of the National Defence Force must intervene, because we can't have generals who speak recklessly like this. We know, even in other countries, generals can't speak as they wish, because a general is a person of privilege who has the military capability and capacity to can cause instability in the country. So for a general to speak and cast aspersions on the trust between the establishment and its people, it's a problem. And I would wish that this general or even the military command council can rein on this general, and these generals must start to do their work. You can't complain about the safety of borders when it's your responsibility, when you are paid by taxpayers to ensure that you defend the territory, you defend the republic and the people. You are the one complaining. It's very incompetent.
Is that the right approach, Chairperson, considering once again that maybe perhaps he shouldn't have been speaking out loudly like this publicly, but the content of what he is saying and the content of what he's speaking to seems to speak to the reality of soldiers on the ground, one, but also the experience of South Africans when it comes to porous borders. He goes on to say this: if we are going to play Big Brother in Africa, and that's the point that has been stressed before, if we're going to play Big Brother in Africa, what we give to the Defence Force should symbolize that. I'm saying to the politicians, next time you sit and debate, think of whether you are protected or not. So it doesn't necessarily speak about competence, but it speaks about what this general, who is a Surgeon General of the South African National Defence Force, is saying that there is a problem.
No, look, a general by privilege can directly speak through the Chief of the National Defence Force, to the Minister or the Deputy Minister. He can speak even to us as a portfolio committee every time they appear on us. Now, for a general who has the responsibility to defend those borders, to complain, without him doing his responsibility, without him doing a proper plan, without him and his collective not doing their work to ensure that our borders are safe. Because people are paying taxes, which pays the general's salary to defend them, to defend their territory, and to defend their borders. So it can't be a general complaint. The problem is that what he's saying is correct, but he did not have a sense of occasion. Where he said it is wrong, and secondly, he's a person of privilege who can speak directly to the authorities because he's part of the establishment. For him to talk anti-establishment statements in a funeral, it creates doubt and trust deficit between the state and its people. And it's wrong for it to be said by anybody who's wearing a uniform. There must be protocol, there must be decorum, there must be doctrine. We're running a national defense force. Yep. It's not also a Mickey Mouse establishment or a private company of a general.
What do you think that description, that particular description, a Mickey Mouse defense force, does for the credibility of the South African National Defense Force and how the South African National Defense Force is viewed by their other counterparts in other countries?
Look, it's just a point that most of our generals, they've been on a honeymoon, or some of them. And what the issue of DRC has done, it has created a point where society would have to embark on a dialogue, where people need to ask questions about our defense capabilities as a nation, where people will have to ask even serious questions about credentials and competencies of some of the senior officials in our military, because it has been run more like a private establishment. When we have a defense force that needs to embark on a military-civilian relations, even just for the army to explain why are we in DRC. It's a part of the responsibility of generals. Just for them on a daily basis through the military command council, they need to plan and execute a strategy of how we deal with borders on a daily basis. That is part of their work, part of their competencies, and they can't cry like babies because that is their competence and responsibility. Yeah. And it's just unfortunate that the funeral was used to raise such important matters, especially not appreciating the sacrifice and the commitment that the soldier who was buried has done for the nation and has done for the flag.
Yeah, perhaps maybe it was a cry for help, actually. But what do parliamentarians do now with the issue around the underfunding of the South African National Defence Force? There's common cause around that. And that underfunding obviously does have an impact on the deployment as well as the work that is expected of our soldiers. Or even considering, for instance, the budget that wasn't delivered, still the money that is allocated comes in far below than what is expected of the percentage compared to other countries spending about 2% of their GDP on the military force. and we don't come close to that. We're at about 0.7%.
Look, I fully agree with the point that we need to improve on the funding of our defense, because state governments or state exist on three reasons. The state exists to feed its people, the state exists to grow its people, the state exists to defend its people. That is one of the key anchors of the state governments and statecraft. And I agree, that's why all countries in the world, and most countries, they spend anything between 2 and 4% of their GDP towards defending their sovereignty and territorial integrity, because even now, our territorial integrity and sovereignty is under challenge from gangsters, from extortionists, from zama-zamas, and the point that is raised by the general, but in a wrong platform of a funeral. We need to improve the funding. And so far, this meeting of the minds between us as the portfolio committee, as well as the executive, the president so far has made a commitment that they will increase their funding to the defense force from 0.7% to 1.5% of the GDP. We are having a closed session meeting with National Treasury next week, Friday, on the 28th, to finalize that process of how, over the medium-term expenditure framework, we'll phase in the implementation of increasing our funding to 1.5% of the GDP, so that we are not blamed for porous borders, we're not blamed for high levels of crime, we're not blamed for our people who die, over 29,000 every year, in the hands of criminals. That honeymoon for criminals must also come to an end, because they play into the gallery of what the general said, turning the institution of the country into a Mickey Mouse or even the National Defense Force. We need to improve. The time now has come that South Africa must take its rightful space in ensuring that its citizens are properly protected, its people are properly benefiting from the taxes and they pay to pay salaries of soldiers and the police and intelligence, and yet they are not safe. It's just quite unfair. It can't continue like this. We are clear as the portfolio group that the honeymoon is over now. We need to defend our nation.
Finally, as a member of parliament, as a politician, a member of the African National Congress, do you take accountability and responsibility for the underfunding of the military of this country, as well as for the porous borders? Because these are budgets that go through parliament, and these are budgets that are voted on, and politicians in the majority have voted for these budgets to go ahead.
Yes, we need to take responsibility, because this underfunding happened in Parliament over the last 15 years. The last time we had a credible funding of the Defense Force about 15 years ago, where we funded it with 1.4% to the GDP. And now what we need to know, even all literatures in terms of military science, be it Newzroom or Maphaha, they are very clear that in times of peace, you need to prepare for war, and in times of war, you need to prepare for peace. And we are at a point now where our country is peaceful, but we cannot say we are immune from any terrorist attack. We cannot say we are immune from any attack. And it must be clear that the military command council, these generals, and some of them must do their work. We cannot allow them to complain we can't wait until we have a terrorist attack or we have an attack in our country. We need to wake up and smell the coffee, because in times of peace, we must prepare for war, and in times of war, prepare for peace.
Thank you so much for your time. That is Dakota Legoete. He's the chairperson of Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Defence as well as Military Veterans.